In the summer of 1665, London was hiding a secret that terrified even the bravest souls. Behind ordinary wooden doors marked with a single red cross, entire families were quietly disappearing overnight. This wasn't because of war or execution, but because of an invisible enemy that moved through breath and touch. The shocking truth was that once a single person inside a house showed signs of the plague, everyone inside was sealed in together by law. Healthy and sick alike, locked away from the outside world and abandoned to their fate. Few people today realize that these plague houses were not hospitals. They were slow prisons of fear, where time stretched unbearably and hope thinned with every passing hour. As night fell, the city streets grew silent, except for the distant cries of the infected and the heavy footsteps of watchmen who ensured no one escaped. This wasn't just a disease, it was a system of containment that turned homes into graves, while the rest of the city tried to sleep. As darkness settled, life inside a plague house followed a cruel rhythm that few ever survived long enough to describe. The windows were sealed, the doors bolted from the outside, and food, if it came at all, was left on the ground by terrified neighbors who wouldn't dare come close. The smell inside was overwhelming, a mixture of sickness, sweat, waste, and fear, growing stronger with every hour. Children cried through the night, not understanding why they couldn't leave, while their parents tried to comfort them, knowing that comfort itself could carry death. Those who were still healthy slept lightly, listening for any change in breathing, knowing that the sound of a nearby cough might mean the beginning of their end. There were no doctors inside, no real treatment. There were only prayers whispered into the darkness and desperate attempts to keep distance in rooms far too small to allow it. Time lost all meaning, and the night felt endless, stretching into a waiting game where survival depended more on luck than strength. By the early hours before dawn, the silence inside many plague houses became heavier than the screams that had filled the night. Silence often meant someone had stopped breathing. Bodies couldn't be removed until authorities allowed it, so the dead remained among the living, sometimes for days. They were wrapped in cloth if anyone had the strength, or left where they fell if no one did. The psychological weight of this reality was as deadly as the disease itself. Survivors were forced to share a small space with their loss, all while wondering if they would be next. Outside, London slowly awakened. Markets reopened, and life continued with a strange determination, while behind those marked doors, entire households simply vanished from memory. Some houses were reopened weeks later to reveal no survivors at all, their stories ending without a witness. Others released a single, weakened figure back into the city, forever changed, carrying memories that could never be spoken aloud. When morning finally arrived, it didn't bring relief. Daylight only revealed what the darkness had hidden. Weak light exposed swollen faces, stained bedding, and the quiet realization that another day had begun without rescue or mercy. Some survivors attempted to clean their surroundings, believing that cleanliness might save them, scrubbing floors with vinegar while fighting dizziness and exhaustion. Others sat motionless, conserving strength, afraid that even standing up might push their bodies past the point of recovery. The watchman outside would occasionally knock, not to enter, but to ask through the door if anyone still lived. The answer, if it came, was often faint and broken. These moments were filled with dread, because silence could mean the house would soon be scheduled for the burial carts and official closure. Hope flickered weakly in these mornings, but for most it was already slipping away, replaced by acceptance and a quiet, gnawing fear. As days turned into nights and nights into weeks, the memory of life before the plague began to fade. The world outside the sealed door felt distant, like a place that no longer existed, replaced by the narrow walls and heavy air that defined survival. Some people kept track of time by carving marks into wood or whispering prayers at set hours, clinging to routine as a form of resistance against despair. When release finally came, if it came at all, it was rarely celebrated. Survivors stepped back into a city transformed by loss. Streets were emptier, Familiar faces were gone, and the sound of burial bells still echoed through neighborhoods that once felt safe. Many who lived through the plague house carried invisible scars for the rest of their lives, haunted by the knowledge that their survival came at the cost of witnessing death at its most intimate. The plague houses of 1665 did not just contain a disease, they reshaped how London understood fear, survival, and the value of human life. Even after the red crosses were painted over, the memory of those plague houses lingered in the minds of Londoners like a shadow. Neighbors avoided former plague homes for years, whispering that sickness still clung to the walls, that death had soaked too deeply into the wood to ever truly leave. Survivors often found themselves isolated, not by law this time, but by public fear. People would cross the street to avoid them, or refuse to let them inside shops and taverns. The experiences inside those sealed homes replayed endlessly in their thoughts. The sound of coughing in quiet rooms, the weight of waiting through the darkness. Many struggled to sleep, waking in a panic at the slightest noise, their bodies free but their minds still locked behind bolted doors. The plague had passed, but its nights lived on inside those who endured them. In the years that followed, London tried to move forward, yet the system of plague houses remained a grim reminder of how society had chosen control over compassion. Officials defended the practice as necessary, but the human cost was rarely spoken aloud. Families were erased not just by illness, but by isolation, by fear-driven policies that left people to face death without aid. The quiet truth was that many who might have survived with care never got the chance. As new generations grew up, stories of the plague houses became warnings, reminders of what happens when survival becomes a numbers game. A night inside a plague house was more than a battle against disease. It was a test of humanity itself, one that London endured but never truly forgot. Long after the plague faded into official records, the physical spaces continued to shape how London remembered its vulnerability. Some plague houses were torn down, their timber burned. Others were reoccupied by families who either didn't know or chose not to ask what had happened within those walls. Yet even decades later, builders reported finding strange markings scratched into door frames, prayers etched into beams, and symbols meant to ward off death carved into hidden corners. These were silent testimonies left behind by people who believed they would never be heard from again. They were not just acts of superstition, but of desperation. Attempts to leave proof that they had existed, suffered, and hoped. The city expanded, but its emotional geography still carried the weight of those nights. Historians would later debate whether the plague houses truly saved London, but for those who lived through them, that question hardly mattered. What endured was the knowledge that survival had depended less on fairness and more on circumstance, on which door the plague happened to knock on first. A night inside a plague house revealed the fragile line between order and chaos, showing how quickly ordinary life could be suspended by fear. The Great Plague eventually burned itself out, leaving a quieter city and a population forever changed. The legacy of those sealed houses remained as a warning, written not in law or stone but in memory, reminding us that in moments of crisis, the choices made in the dark often define a society long after the danger has passed. What makes the story of London's plague houses endure is not the scale of death, but the silence that surrounded it. Thousands experienced terror and abandonment in their own homes, yet history recorded their suffering in numbers, not voices. Their nights were spent waiting for footsteps that might never come, listening to the city continue beyond their sealed doors and realizing how easily a person could vanish. This quiet erasure is what gives the plague houses their lasting power, reminding us that some of the most important human experiences are the least visible. A night inside those houses was a confrontation with fear, isolation, and moral uncertainty. Even now, centuries later, their story asks an enduring question, not about disease, but about how much humanity we are willing to preserve when fear demands sacrifice. Thanks for watching.